Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie, and this is episode number 1134 for November 9th, 2025. Coming up in a few minutes.
And there's no reason that Denmark shouldn't have been making good whiskey for centuries, like they have in Scotland. We have farmland and the pure waters, albeit water that's much more chalky, much more hard than the water in Scotland. But we ended up making a lot of aquavit instead of whiskey.
Kim Moller-Elshøj and his colleagues are making whiskey now, and they've banded together to create the Danish Whisky Manifesto, a definition of Danish whiskey. What sets it apart from other whiskey definitions is its requirement that only Danish grain be used to make Danish whiskey, or else it has to be disclosed on the label. We'll hear more from Kim on this week's WhiskyCast In-Depth. I'll also have the What I'm Tasting This Week department with an unusual vatted malt from Lost Lantern, and on Behind the Label, we'll take a look back at the history of WhiskyCast as we celebrate our 20th anniversary on Wednesday. The news is next on this episode of WhiskyCast, whiskey's longest-running and most awarded podcast series. Crafted with time, shaped by nature, perfected by generations. From Yamazaki to Hibiki to Hakushu, every drop of House of Suntory whiskey is a reflection of where it comes from. House of Suntory, this is Japanese whiskey.
Enjoy responsibly. Suntory Whiskey Single Malt and Blended Japanese Whiskey. 43% alcohol by volume. Copyright 2025 Suntory Global Spirits Import Company, Chicago, Illinois.
Gifting season's right around the corner. Luckily, you don't have to overthink this one. Dewar's 12-year-old, finished in first fill, unrinsed bourbon casks. It's the kind of gift that makes you look good while making them feel special. Stick around. I'll explain.
Let's get started with the news. It's brought to you by the Dalmore. Diageo has revised its earnings guidance following a flat first quarter to its fiscal year. Europe, Latin America, and Africa all posted strong sales gains, but they were offset by lagging sales in the U.S. and China. Interim CEO Nick Jangiani said the U.S. consumer environment was softer than expected. Sales of Scotch whiskey rose in the U.S., but tequila sales were down sharply. The company expects tariffs on its UK and European exports to the U.S. to cost it around $200 million during the fiscal year. There is still no word on the naming of a permanent CEO to replace Deborah Crew, who stepped down earlier this year. Meanwhile, William Grant & Sons is looking for a new CEO once again. Soren Hogg stepped down this week after just 2 years on the job. The family-controlled company has not commented on Hogg's departure. He oversaw Grant's acquisition of the famous Grouse and Naked Malt from Edrington earlier this year. CFO and CCO Graham Jenkins and Doug Bagley have been tapped to lead the company for now. Engineers at Edrington's distilleries in Speyside are set to go on strike tomorrow. The 7-day walkout by GMB Scotland members is over switching to a 5-day work week without extra pay. The engineers had been working a 4-day work week. The strike will affect the Macallan, the Glenrothes, and the Parkmore distillery. MGP Ingredients reported a significant decline in sales during its fiscal third quarter. Contract distilling was off by 40%, while sales of its own brands were down by 3% from a year ago. And Molson Coors has written off almost all of its investment in Blue Run Spirits. The beer giant bought Blue Run for $78 million 2 years ago, and this week wrote off $75 million of Blue Run's value. The company has also abandoned plans to build a Blue Run distillery in Kentucky. We first reported Jackie Thompson's appointment as Visitors Center Manager at the new Port & Trewin Distillery on Islay a couple of weeks ago, but I had the chance to talk with Jackie this week about the move from Ardbeg, where she had been for nearly 28 years. What prompted you to come out of retirement, as it were, to join Port & Trewin?
Do you know, it's a bit of a misconception that I ever retired. There was no period of retirement whatsoever. I'm 58 years old, and I've had a wonderful career at Ardbeg, a 19th century distillery. And this There were a number of sleepless nights when Sukhinder approached me to join the team. I have deep respect for Sukhinder and have for many years. We've known each other on and off for a long time. And I've known Georgie also. So it was just an opportunity that was really far too good to miss, to join a team that I guess I respect. Going back to liquid, having seen the distillery rising from the first bricks, it was something that I realised, as I say, after a number of sleepless nights, that it was too good an opportunity to miss, and I was ready to move on.
What are you going to bring to Portentruen?
Well, I hope I can bring a great deal to the distillery and the team. At present, it's a lot of engineering. You know, when we think about what is going on at the moment, it's construction. But what I love, and I said in my initial press announcement, that visitors have never been an afterthought here. You know, the flow of the distillery in terms of the process, i.e. if we're thinking about, you know, the way the liquid flows from worts to wash to distillate, that's always flowed beautifully in a distillery. And I think for me, it's a beautiful thing that Portentruen has this lovely flow for the visitor. You know, everything has been considered. Everything's done with intention. We're a 21st century distillery, and the whisky community as we know it is thriving. It is well informed and quite complex. And we have space to accommodate all of that, which is really lovely.
When do you open?
How long's a piece of pipe, Mark? There are thousands of miles of pipe and electrical cable in there. It's a complex build. It's pioneering. It's very innovative. You know, this is the culmination of Sukhinder and Rajbir's journey in whisky, which is 50 years in the making. So it is going to open when it's open. There is commissioning of the distillery process with Georgie and her team to be done. And then there's the build and the design as well, which Rajbir is kind of spearheading. So there's a lot of irons in the fire. Next year, I'll say. Next year, definitely.
What will visitors see when they visit Portentruen?
Well, it's an interesting structure. You know, the structure itself, we've watched going up brick by brick. And when you look at it from the road, it's this almost little series of, or big series of buildings. I think people will be very surprised when they actually come into the distillery, but they will see, particularly from my side, it is a celebration of Islay. You know, it really is. We talk about why flavour exists on Islay, what it is about Islay that makes flavour. And it's about the land, the elements. It's about, you know, what we have on Islay to make whisky. So it's a celebration of what has gone past. I remember I met a colleague recently who said he was a music guy, and he kind of said to me, it's a modern distillery built on the greatest hits of tradition. And I love that. I think it hits things perfectly. We are in the pursuit of flavour. My little name for it is a bit of a flavour factory. So people will be able to see some beautiful methods of old floor maltings, direct fired stills. You know, fermentation is very, very much to the forefront. And there's lovely little gadgets to cool things up, to cool things down and heat things up. It's a wonderful medley of variables and transformational parts of the process, which can really put the emphasis on flavoursome spirit. And that's what we want people to see when they come in. As well, of course, Mark, as some playful stuff.
Some playful stuff.
Yeah, I'm playful. As a team, everyone's playful. Of course we are. We will be taking people through the. I like it. That was kind of a menacing laugh. Yeah, we'll be very serious in what we make, but there will be playful elements and little twists to that process. We're going to be very transparent. We want to tell people what happens within the process, of course, but why it happens, how it happens. And for me, that's been a real treat to go back to almost the beginning again and really understand the fundamentals and the nuts and bolts. Some of the project team have taught me, I mean, usually they say an apple a day keeps the doctor away. For me, it's an acronym a day. I'm learning about APIs and no PRPs and PNDs and all sorts of acronyms with regards engineering and whisky making. So it's very refreshing.
A lot of the new distilleries that have opened up and places like Port Ellen have priced their tours out of reach for the average whiskey lover. Have you decided yet what kind of tours you're going to offer, and are they going to be priced so that people can afford them?
That's a really great question. We want to hang our hats on community. I mean, we really do. You know, the whisky community, as Sukhinder and Rajbir know it, as Georgie knows it, as Ollie Chilton knows it, as I know it, on Islay, as a lot of our contemporaries on Islay and distilleries know it. We really want people to have something which is accessible to them. So whether you're coming for something really forensic and technical, or you're coming for a cocktail, you're coming for a great meal up in the visitor centre, in the restaurant. We have a separate bar and restaurant as well. So from a tour perspective, we want to make sure that it is welcoming to all. And we will really, really make sure that happens. We want it to be, I guess, the heart of our community, and a bit of creativity, warm welcome, and with a little twist, as I said, that's what we aim to do.
The Elixir Distillers' owned distillery is expected to open next year. New whiskeys to mention this week. Michter's has announced that it will release its latest 20-year-old bourbon next month. The $1,200 bourbon will go on sale December 1st. Iowa's Cedar Ridge Distillery has released its annual double-barrel bourbon finished in New American Oak. But this year they're adding a double-barrel rye also finished in New American Oak. Both are priced at $60 a bottle. I received samples of both this week and will have my tasting notes for them soon at WhiskyCast.com. John Campbell has released his first bourbon since joining California's Sespe Creek Distillery last year. The Warbringer Bourbon Batch 22 was blended by Campbell, but was distilled before he joined Sespe Creek. It's made using mesquite-smoked grains and finished in sherry casks. It's priced at $55 a bottle. Wyoming Whiskey is taking its Buffalo Bill Cody bourbon nationwide. Previously a Wyoming-only expression, this 6-year-old bourbon is bottled at 48% ABV and will be available in 12 U.S. states and online. I received a sample this week, and I'll have my tasting notes for it soon at the WhiskyCast website. Willett Distillery is honoring the late Evan Kulsveen with its latest release, the Willett Family Estate Small Batch Bourbon. It's a blend of 2 distinct mash bills, one low rye and the second high rye, and the result is bottled at cask strength. It'll be released in limited quantities, no word on pricing. Turning to Scotch now, Highland Park's latest release comes out in January. Cask strength Heather is distilled entirely from barley, malted and peated at the Orkney Distillery. It's the first in a new range of cask strength single malts, and will carry a recommended retail price of $80 a bottle. Brook Laddie is releasing a rye whiskey exclusively in the U.S. The Laddie rye is 7 years old and matured in a combination of first fill ex-bourbon barrels and first fill toasted American oak casks. It'll be priced at $59.99 a bottle. And India's Paul John whiskey is out with its annual Christmas edition. This single malt is finished in cream sherry casks for 3 years. As with past Christmas editions, this one will be available in limited amounts. The recommended retail price, $85 a bottle. And finally, I made a mistake in last week's news segment. In my story on Lost Lantern's latest series of whiskeys, I mentioned the 888 Distillery in Nantucket, but I said it was in Rhode Island. It's actually in Massachusetts. Thanks to the sharp-eared listeners who caught my mistake. You can keep up on the latest whiskey news all week long at WhiskyCast.com and in the WhiskyCast community app. The news is brought to you by the Dalmore.
Hello, Richard Patterson here, Master Distiller, Master Blender for the Dalmore. You know, whenever the team and I are in the world sharing our exceptional single malt, we like to keep in touch with Mark Gillespie and the latest news from WhiskyCast.
We're marking our 20th anniversary later this week, and we'd like you to help us celebrate and be part of next week's episode. Just record a voice memo or video clip 15 to 30 seconds long or so. Include your name and where you're listening from, along with a comment on how you discovered WhiskyCast or what you've learned from listening. You get the idea. Email it to us at comments@whiskycast.com, and we'll pick a few to run in next week's episode. Thanks for your support of WhiskyCast over the years. We wouldn't be here without you. Let's open up the calendar and see what's happening around the world of whiskey. The Whiskey Exchange in London has a Lafroig tasting this Wednesday night at its Covent Garden shop. Tickets are still available for Whiskey Fest New York on Friday night at the Marriott Marquis Hotel in Times Square. I'll be in Fredericton, New Brunswick for the annual New Brunswick Spirits Festival, November 18th through the 22nd. The Whiskey Lounge hosts a Berry Brothers and Rudd tasting on the 20th at Seven Oaks Pub in Manchester, England. And the Whiskey Exchange has its annual Whiskey of the Year selection tasting that same night at its Great Portland Street shop in London. Finally, tickets for the 2026 Victoria Whiskey Festival will go on sale starting Friday, November 21st, with ticket and hotel packages available through the Hotel Grand Pacific. Single class and tasting tickets will go on sale Sunday, the 23rd, in person only at the Strath in downtown Victoria. The festival is January 15th through the 18th in Victoria, British Columbia. If you're organizing a whiskey event, let us know about it. We'll add it to the calendars at whiskycast.com and in the WhiskyCast community app.
Hey again, it's Gabriel from Jewers. Every holiday has that moment when the food's done and the talking, laughing, and sipping begins. That's where the perfect gift shows up. Jewers 12-year-old. Finished in first fill, unrinsed bourbon casks, and crafted by 6-time Master Blender of the Year, Stephanie McLeod. It's the highest rated 12-year blended scotch out there, a gift that speaks for itself. Because holidays aren't about the gifts we keep, they're about the ones we share. Please enjoy responsibly. Copyright 2025, Jewers is a trademark. Imported by John Dewar & Sons Company, Coral Gables, Florida. Blended Scotch whiskey, 40% alcohol by volume.
WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by Glendalough Irish Whiskey. Denmark's distillers are trying to lay the groundwork for geographical indicator status for Danish whiskey. It'll take time, and there are many steps along the way. One of the early steps was to create a definition for Danish whiskey, and 13 distillers have done just that with the Danish Whisky Manifesto. Kim Moller-Elshøj is the master distiller at Mosgaard Distillery, and he's one of the architects of the Manifesto. So tell me about this manifesto. What was the impetus behind it?
Well, I mean, it goes quite a long way back, because when I was starting up Nyborg Distillery, I had already, spent time in Scotland and had a bit of a network and work experience over there. And what I felt in Scotland, and also knew to exist in the US, was a brotherhood between distillers. And I wanted to take an initiative that could foster that in Denmark as well. So long story short, that's where the beginning of forming an industry body for distillers and spirits producers began. And I was part of the board of directors for that for a number of years. And about 5 years ago, we took the first step into defining Danish whiskey, but it was never something that we communicated. We just said Danish whiskey should be fermented, distilled, and matured in Denmark. But it never went beyond that. But then we were a couple of distilleries that put our heads together and said, why don't we take it one step further? We've seen what's been going on in Japan. We've seen what's taking place at the same time in New Zealand. And we believe that we have something specific to offer. So we were to begin with a handful of distilleries that were exchanging ideas back and forth. And it took a long time and more distilleries actually joined in to be part of this project. And the idea was to put into words what we believe should make Danish whiskey unique. And I think part of what does make it unique is that it's not just process. Because if you look at the definition of Scotch, it almost exclusively looks at process. Partly the same with Irish whiskey. And for instance, there is no mention in the production of Scotch that it should be made, for instance, by Scottish grain. So we were thinking, how can we take it one step further? And there's no reason that Denmark shouldn't have been making good whiskey for centuries, like they have in Scotland. We have the farmland and the pure waters, albeit water that's much more chalky, much more hard than the water in Scotland. But we ended up making a lot of aquavit instead of whiskey. So what actually defines the manifesto is a combination of wanting to use what is inherently Danish. You know, the skill of the Danish people, or whoever is in Denmark with us, raw materials from Denmark, so Danish water and Danish grains. When we come to 2030, we've made this seal that we're going to put on our products. You're not allowed to wear the seal. It's called Authentic Danish Whisky, unless your whiskey has been made with Danish grains. If you've used something else, then you have to declare it. So transparency is also something very important to the Danish Whisky Manifesto. And there, you could say, with all the Danish distillers have been inspired by the many that have gone before us. And a lot have looked to Scotland, and some have looked to the US. But if you look at Scotland, they won't even let you declare anything that's in the bottle unless it's the youngest whiskey. And percentages in a vatting or a blend, no. I know that, for instance, Compass Box, they have workarounds around that. But something like that, with a greater sense of transparency, is something that we're going to forward.
You had to actually break away from the Danish wine and spirits body to do this, didn't you?
Well, yes, in a sense we did. I sat in Wine and Spirits Organization Denmark in their board of directors for a number of years. And we had a project group, a working group, that was just for the future definition of Danish whiskey. And everybody on the board knew that we were working on this. And we had been working on it for, systematically over 3 years, probably more around 5. And we got to the point where we said, okay, now we're ready. We're ready to publish the Danish Whisky Manifesto. But we need a little bit of money to do the PR, to do a website and a launch and so on. But the other members of the Wine and Spirits Organization of Denmark were not producers. They were importers and distributors. And to begin with, they supported the idea of this. And then all of a sudden, that support disappeared. And
so money became involved, right?
So, sorry?
As soon as money became involved, right?
Yes. And it wasn't like there were probably, when there were the most, 32 of the 50 members or so were distillers or spirits producers from Denmark. So, though they were small, they had been contributing to the box of money within the organization, but the support disappeared. And what happened was that a guy called Henrik Brinks and I took it upon ourselves to form a new industry body just for distillers and spirits producers. And we managed to do that. And now almost all of the members that were before in the other organization have formed their own, just for people who actually make the stuff.
What does the manifesto require to be called Danish whiskey?
Well, it requires that the whiskey is, again, fermented, brewed, fermented, distilled, and matured in Denmark using Danish grains. And otherwise, you have to comply with the other rules that are in place for what a whiskey is in Europe. So aged in casks made out of wood for a minimum of 3 years. We do not stipulate oak. And we've gone further that we will not use any caramel coloring. And if I remember correctly, because there have been iterations, we are also refraining from chill filtration. So in that way, it's gone a bit farther. And another thing is that when we say that we think of acting locally, and we want to be thinking of sustainability, then sustainable is not something we are. It's a journey that we feel obligated to continuously investigate how we can become more and more sustainable in our practices. But another thing is, we really, when we say local, we mean within 30 miles or 50 kilometers of where a distillery is. So if your grain comes, you say, I get it locally, it has to be really local, And something that's very important is that this was only launched earlier this year, back in April. And the distillers are now putting their money where their mouth is. They're beginning to walk the walk. Well, they have been for a while, but eventually down the line, we would like to see this become a GI, a legal definition of Danish whiskey. Now it's something that 14 Danish distilleries agree on. But once we can show a number of years of practice of what we preach, then we can say we have precedents or precedents that we can turn it into legislation. And that's the objective long term.
How is the health of the industry so far, of your colleagues?
It varies. I mean, the industry overall in Denmark and in Europe and the US, all over the world, spirits industry is challenged. And it's not surprising. If you look at just the US and Europe, and you look at just whiskey distilleries, there is around 850 in the US out of the over 3,000 distilleries, and there is more than 1,400 whiskey distilleries in Europe. But the shelf space in the wine and spirit shop has not increased to the same extent. And yes, there is a saturation of the market. And though Denmark is a young whiskey country, along with our brothers in the rest of the Nordics, though we make good whiskey, it's not enough just making it. we have to market it with the same seal that we had when we chose the copper pot stills that we use. And there's still something to be learned there. We still have to improve on distribution to sell. And there was a hiccup, a rather large hiccup, about 6 months ago, or a little more, when Diageo pulled out of Stauning. Distilled ventures were shut down, and that meant that Stauning, this is my perception. Stauning changed a little from being, a Japanese bullet train to being a locomotive that where you kind of have to shovel the coal yourself, because of the momentum behind Stauning was of value to all of the Nordics, and especially all of the Danish whiskies, because it put Danish whiskey on the map. But fortunately, distilleries like Thy, Mosgaard, a couple of others are gaining recognition abroad. So we're lifting together.
Anything else you can add that I didn't ask about?
Well, about Danish whiskey and the Manifesto, what I would add was that we're probably a couple of years ahead in Denmark compared to the other Nordic countries. But we had a get-together shortly before the Danish Whisky Manifesto was launched. That happened at Copenhagen Distillery a good half year ago, where 14 distilleries from Iceland, Finland, Sweden, Norway, and Denmark got together and said, how about we join forces to a larger extent and lift the Nordics as a category? Because there's little chance that you're going to go into an airport and find specialty shelves for Danish whiskey, Swedish whiskey, Norwegian whiskey, and so on. But if we could get shelf space that was for the Nordics, that would be interesting. And the other Nordic countries, when we spoke about that at that get-together, were inspired, because we shared it, by the Danish Whisky Manifesto. And they were like, we need something like this as well. And, what ties us together is that, yes, okay, if you are in the very north of Norway, it makes little sense talking about local grains because they can't grow them. But a lot of what we share in terms of values, in terms of focusing on what's local, and sustainability, responsibility, and the brotherhood that exists between the Nordic countries is something that I'm quite excited about for the world of whiskey. Right? I mean, this past weekend, there was a Nordic zone at Whisky Live London, where I think 8 or 10 distilleries from the Nordic were curled up together in their own little zone at Whisky Live, and it was really well received. So I'd like to hope that this Danish initiative will have a trickling down effect throughout the Nordics. Yes.
You'll find a link to the manifesto in the show notes for this episode at whiskycast.com. And thanks to Kim Moller-Elshøj for joining us this week on WhiskyCast In-Depth, brought to you by Glendalough Irish Whiskey.
Our story begins in the wilds of County Wicklow, the Garden of Ireland, a place where nature moves slowly and meaningfully. Some whiskies blend in. Glendalough Double Barrel stands apart. I'm Rowdy Rooney, head distiller here at Glendalough, and I personally oversee our whisky making process from start to finish. We do things slowly and we do them right. We start with a smooth single grain Irish whisky. We age it in flame-charred American oak for soft vanilla and a honeyed depth. Then we finish it in Oloroso casks from a small bodega in Spain. Casks we season and ship ourselves to make sure the wood is still alive with character when it arrives. That kind of care gives Glendalough Double Barrel its rich layers of dried fruit, warm spice and signature smoothness. This is a whisky at its own pace, and it's worth every second. This is Glendalough Double Barrel, crafted to stand apart.
Let's begin the What I'm Tasting This Week department with the Loch Lomond 12-year-old single malt Scotch. This Lowlands whiskey is bottled at 46% ABV, and the nose has touches of caramel, creme brulee, and dried fruits. The taste has a kick of black pepper balanced by fruity notes of apple pie, peaches, and apricots, while honey and vanilla add a nice balance. The finish is long and well-rounded with a touch of spice, and I'm scoring the Loch Lomond 12-year-old single malt a 92. Lost Lantern's American Vatted Malt Remix is a blending of Lost Lantern's original whiskey with malts from 11 different distilleries across 8 states. It's bottled at 55.4% ABV. The nose has a nice balance of maltiness and fruitiness with touches of stone fruits, honey, vanilla, and a slight nuttiness. The taste has a honeyed sweetness with touches of cinnamon and cardamom, stone fruits, and leather. The finish, long and spicy with a gentle touch of honey to round things out. I'm scoring Lost Lantern's American Vatted Malt Remix a 92. Finally, let's look at the 2025 edition of Widow Jane's The Vaults. This 15-year-old bourbon is bottled at 49.5% ABV, and the nose is full of caramel, leather, tobacco, oak, and honey. The taste is thick and chewy with good baking spices and notes of leather, tobacco, charred oak, and honey. The finish, long and oaky with lingering spices, and I'm scoring the 2025 release of Widow Jane's The Vaults a 93. I'll be adding these whiskeys to our searchable list of nearly 3,900 different whiskeys from all over the world. Check it out this week at WhiskyCast.com. Japanese whiskey began with Shinjiro Tori's vision to reflect the true nature and spirit of Japan. The House of Suntory was founded on these principles, guided by generations of craftsmanship that have transformed time, nature, and precision into something greater than the sum of its parts. Pure waters from the mountains of Hakushu, Mizunara oak shaped by decades of patience, a blending philosophy rooted in harmony. These aren't just techniques, they're a way of thinking, a quiet pursuit of balance and depth. From Yamazaki to Hakushu to Hibiki, every whiskey is a reflection of where it comes from and the hands that shape it. House of Suntory, the founding house of Japanese whiskey.
Enjoy responsibly. Suntory Whiskey Single Malt and Blended Japanese Whiskey. 43% alcohol by volume. Copyright 2025 Suntory Global Spirits Import Company, Chicago, Illinois.
Let's open up the WhiskyCast community app and see what people are talking about this week in our community segment. Had one comment on last week's interview with Stacey Longworth and Roz Frame from Tullibardin. Stusha66 posted this in the app. There was an irony when I was listening to this week's podcast with Stacey and Roz from Tullibardin, as I was literally driving right past the distillery on my way home from work in Perth. After I posted the news about Bruichladdich new rye whiskey in the app, Bill Ricker chimed in with this comment. Interesting, the labeling would be problematic in the UK. Good to hear the not-so-new management at Laddie is honoring the heterodox rebellion of the revivers. Very true, they'll still have to call it a single-grain Scotch whiskey to comply with Scottish law. Don't forget, we're looking for your memories of WhiskyCast for next week's 20th anniversary episode. Is there a favorite interview you remember from the past? A tasting note that led you to search out that whiskey? We want to hear from you. Just record a voice memo or video 15 to 30 seconds long, and if you run a little longer than that, we won't mind. Email it to comments@whiskycast.com, and we'll share them on next week's episode. If there's anything else you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, download the free WhiskyCast community app from your app store and join the conversation. You can also find us on social media. Look for WhiskyCast on X, Threads, Blue Sky, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast. Once again, our email address is comments@whiskycast.com. Let's close out the show now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and people who make whiskey unique. And I hope you'll indulge me in a little bit of navel-gazing this week. After all, it's not every day one can celebrate 20 years of having the best job in the world. Back when we started WhiskyCast on November 12, 2005, the podcast universe was a lot smaller. WhiskyCast was the first whiskey-focused podcast on iTunes, and one of just 3,000 podcasts in total at the time. Nowadays, it seems like there are 3,000 whiskey podcasts out there. I started producing WhiskyCast episodes to further my own education into whiskey. I figured it would let me talk with the real experts and let me share what I learned with all of you. That is still the focus to this day. I try to learn something new with each episode, and I hope you're learning something new as well. I've been privileged to interview whiskey legends like Parker Beam and Jim Swan, who both appeared on that very first episode in 2005. And I'm proud to say that there are master distillers out there who decided to take the plunge into making whiskey after listening to WhiskyCast. Whether this is your first episode or you've listened to every single episode, you are part of the WhiskyCast community, and I'm grateful for your support. That's all for this episode of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the calendar of events, and of course a complete archive of past episodes that goes all the way back to that very first episode in 2005. Get in touch with us, download the free WhiskyCast community app from your app store, or find us on social media. We're on Blue Sky, X, Threads, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast. And the email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
Food's gone, stories are flying, and everyone's laughing a little too loud. That's when Dewar's 12-year-old feels right at home. Enjoy the holidays from your friends at Dewar's.
Crafted with time, shaped by nature, perfected by generations. From Yamazaki to Hibiki to Hakushu, every drop of House of Suntory whiskey is a reflection of where it comes from. House of Suntory. This is Japanese whiskey.
Enjoy responsibly. Suntory Whiskey Single Malt and Blended Japanese Whiskey. 43% alcohol by volume. Copyright 2025 Suntory Global Spirits Import Company, Chicago, Illinois.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2025, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.